Thank you, worship team. Memories. Why do we remember some experiences and not others? When looking back at my college years, I have a variety of memories, but surprisingly fewer than you would think 4 years of a college education would provide. Some stand out more than others, and some have been completely forgotten. But the ones that stand out, they're like the ones I had when I was a freshman in public speaking class. We were given the task to give a speech on someone who had the most impact on your life. And because it was a Christian college, it couldn't be Jesus. So it had to be someone in your life. And I was trying to be a smart aleck, and I picked a person, and I began to prepare. The day came for me to present, and I happened to be the last one. So there was a handful of people that shared these powerful, short speeches about someone who's really had an impact on their life. They were inspiring, and presenter after presenter went outdoing one another, describing the profound men and women of character that they left a mark on their lives. And the gentleman right before me shared about his own grandfather, which, again, that was sentimental, but the real clincher was his grandfather had passed away just like a couple weeks earlier. As I remember it, I don't think there was like a dry eye in the room, and he waxed eloquently and went on and on and on and on about his grandfather. All the while I was looking with trepidation at my notes in my hand and thinking I might have made a big mistake. As he ended, and there was this huge display of appreciation for this gentleman, he slunk back to his seat, and everyone was like, kind of like, well, we could just end on that note, but I still had to go. And as I stepped behind the lectern doing my speech, I realized that doing a speech on Neil Diamond wasn't going to be very appropriate for the class and for the mood that was set. And I still had 7 to 10 minutes to go on and wax eloquently about the mark Neil Diamond left on my life, which not one laugh was heard that day, not even a laugh of pity, but just a lot of disapproving stares. And it was, those types of moments that you do remember, and many others that you kind of forget, but it kind of made me think about, when we're thinking about memories, is why do we remember some events and not others? As a society, we have coping mechanisms, we have holidays. Even the name holiday has the word holy in it, which means a day that is set aside. It's supposed to be different from every other day. Kind of like Kashmir Pulaski Day. If you're from Illinois, we would get a day off in February to celebrate the life of this man, which I couldn't tell you anything about him, but we got the holiday, and it caused us to remember his life, I guess. But if you're not from Illinois, you kind of missed out. But maybe from Texas, and then we have that phrase, remember the Alamo. I'm not from Texas, so it's not something I maybe dwell on. But on a serious note, every culture even they have memorials that are erected and set up and oftentimes carefully maintained to spur us on to remember significant events, maybe personal courage or examples of sacrifice. George Santayana, he was quoted, you may be familiar with this quote, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." And yet this is contingent really on our memories being reliable and being utilized appropriately. Memories, the ability to take in information, store it, and recall it at a later time. The interwebs tell me that there are 3 stages of memory: encoding, which I'm assuming is give it the right category; storage, where you can store these memories; and retrieval. And problems can occur at any stage of the process. And I can see that fleshed out in my life. Why I can remember songs from the 80s by the Flock of Seagulls, but I can't sometimes remember the precious truths from God's Word. Why is that? The problem is that memories can, I don't know about you, they can become like herding cats. We can really struggle with where to put these memories and how to retrieve them at the right time. Some memories, as you know, can be distorted over time, like the fish that got away. Or how big was that fish? I think it was like that big, if I remember correctly, and possibly everyone else remembers it differently. But seriously, though, some memories we want to savor forever. And yet sometimes we just can't because memories fade. Even like the face of a lost loved one. We never would want to forget that, but over time, our memories can betray us. There are other memories that we long to forget but can't. And they seem so fresh as if it happened yesterday. Maybe sights, sounds, smells, they seem to haunt us in our sleep. Some of us need to forget some memories, but are choosing to cling to them, and now we're stuck. What do we do with these memories? As we close this chapter on 2019, I would love for us to do some hard work this morning. I want us to think about 2019 and intentionally look for God's fingerprints. I would love for us this morning, if we can, just to leverage our memory as a tool that can really give us a strong foundation as we go into 2020. For us to do that, we're going to get into God's Word, and we're going to look at a situation in the life of Joshua. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the character of Joshua, but Joshua was Moses' number 2. He was his right-hand man. As God was leading the nation of Israel out of Egypt and to the promised land, Joshua was right beside Moses every step of the way. Moses was a powerful leader, and even when Scripture says when Moses ascended to Mount Sinai, where he spoke to the Lord, and when God spoke to him face to face, it said that Joshua would go up halfway, maybe catching just a glimpse of what God was talking to Moses about. He was with him every step of the way, and through the history of Israel, we obviously don't have time to cover that this morning, but Israel was doing some good things. They made a dire mistake, and God had given them like a 40-year time out in the desert. But now, at the end of that 40 years, God was ready to lead the nation of Israel into the promised land and fulfill the promises that he had given the country, the people of Israel. But Moses, the fearless, gifted leader of Israel, had recently passed away, and now Joshua was to take up the mantle of leadership. I don't know about you, but imagine for a moment, Moses did not leave small shoes to fill, but rather shoes that really couldn't be filled by anyone other than Moses. Imagine how being Joshua, everyone's looking to you to assume that you hear from God the way that Moses did, that you can perform miracles the way that Moses did, all these things, and that's all on Joshua's shoulders. Maybe not to the same degree, but maybe you've been in a situation when you felt overwhelmed like that. Maybe there's a new assignment or a new command. Maybe your predecessor had really left a mark and everyone loved them, and you are now supposed to take the role. Maybe it's a new role that you've never done before, and you're kind of desperate. Lord, please show up. You have to show up. I'm out of my element. But in Joshua 3, God gives Joshua a beautiful promise and a wonderful encouragement. He says in Joshua 3, verse 7, the Lord said to Joshua, "Today I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel, that they may know that as I was with Moses, so I will be with you." And I can imagine Joshua thinking, thank you so much. Not even knowing what to say. Because everything that Moses did, obviously, it was God working through him. But Joshua knew, I'm not Moses. And yet people are possibly looking for a Moses. And yet God said, I will take care of this. I will give you everything that you need, and you will be the leader that I've called you to be. And we're going to do something a little different this morning. We're going to take just a moment. Looking back at 2019, I'd love for us all to think about a moment. Maybe you've got several, maybe you have one specific one, but has anyone felt in 2019 ill-equipped, going into 2019, ill-equipped for a task that you were being called to? Maybe it's something at work, maybe it's a new position in ministry, maybe it's something even just in the marketplace. Has anyone in 2019 felt ill-equipped for a task? Anybody? I see a couple hands. Well, I'm wondering, would anyone be willing, looking at 2019, was there a task that you felt ill-equipped for, but now we're at the end of the chapter of 2019, and looking back, you're able to see God directed you, God gave you everything that you needed. Would anyone be willing to share briefly a story that kind of represents that scenario, being called again into maybe a new role, and then in God, looking back at 2019, you saw God's faithfulness? Would anyone be willing to share? I've got 3 microphones that, yeah, Kim, if you want to come up here, I'm sure you can project, but.
Good morning. I had no intention of sharing anything this morning, but just as Pastor Mike's talking, I feel like he's speaking to my exact story in ministry. I used to work in kids in previous churches and preschoolers. I felt comfortable. And then, I would say maybe just a little over a year ago, Julia had approached me saying, hey, do you want to kind of take over the connections? And initially I was like, yeah, I can pass out a bulletin. That's so easy. And then I felt like it became more and more. And me going like, oh my gosh, I'm only comfortable with kids. God, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm totally out of my element. And Pastor Mike says, and I've heard, like God doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called. Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Or did I miss that? So time after time, I feel like maybe I've had an idea, or people have maybe shared an interest in doing something, and me going like, oh my gosh, I have no idea. But God has clearly just laid it out. And he continues to be faithful in everything that we're trying to do here. So it just continues to get me excited about, the future and what we're doing. And as long as you just say, yes, God, use me. What do you want to do? I just feel like you don't have to be nervous. He just continues to just provide. So that's fine.
Thank you. That truly is again, it was not planned, but if you remember those first few conversations, absolutely, Kim assumed, I don't know this, I don't know that, but I feel like God is calling me. And again, whenever someone is faithful, available, and teachable, that's, for a pastor, that's you can't find anyone better than that. And that whole phrase is that many times we're just like, well, we're only going to call the equipped. Friends, someone could be equipped and be so far from Jesus. But you have someone who's called. God will take care of the equipping. And Kim's just a real testament of just continually stepping out more and more and doing things. She's no different than any of us. So thanks, Kim, for sharing. Imagine stepping out in faith. And again, starting to see God move, starting to claim some of the promises that Jesus, when he says, I will never leave you nor forsake you. I'm calling you to some pretty intense stuff, but I will never leave you nor forsake you. This is kind of where we find Joshua. In obedience, he is stepping out. He's leading the people. And he starts to lead the nation. They're starting to move. And if you're familiar with the story, what we call Israel today, God had said that is the promised land. So the Jewish nation started to move north, and they're on the east side of what we see as Israel today. And eventually, they were going to kind of take a left and start making their way into Egypt. But there was a huge issue at hand. There's the Jordan River that they had to cross. And God had given Joshua specific commands as to how they were going to do that. Previously in Joshua 3, God said, Joshua, take the Ark of the Covenant, which, if you're familiar with that, it's an ornate golden box. It's got two long poles that the priests would carry it so they don't touch it. And that kind of represented God's presence. And God said to Joshua, take the Ark of the Covenant and have the priests step out 2,000 cubits away. And they do some quick math because, and they had to double check, but a cubit is about 18 inches or so. So I multiplied 2,000 by 18 and divided by 12. I got about 3,000 feet. So it's just over a half mile. God is saying, send the ark out about a half mile in front of the nation and have the priests walk towards the river. Okay? This is kind of crazy, but real specific directions that Joshua was supposed to obey. So the Levites are to start, they're commanded to carry the ark and to start stepping into the Jordan River. And what's cool is in Joshua 4, the author notes, now the Jordan overflows all its banks throughout the time of harvest. So I look at this, and this is just like, think about it, this is the absolute worst time of the year to cross. It's strategically the worst time to cross the Jordan River. It's wider than it ever is at any other time of the year. I mean, if they just spent 40 years in the wilderness, can we just wait like 4 or 6 months, for a better time? It's the worst time of year to cross, but it's the perfect time for God to show off. And that's exactly what God is kind of doing. Many times God's just kind of like showing off. He's like, I'm just going to wait till it gets to absolute worst, and then I'm going to show you what I'm going to do. And it's interesting, if you were to look at the map, once they kind of like took that left, they were going to cross the Jordan. On the other side of the Jordan was the city of Jericho. And that's the first city that they were going to come to and have to engage. And if I was in Jericho, and if I was a soldier on top of the wall, you really don't have to think about the east side, because no one's going to come from the east because the Jordan's overflowing. It's a natural barrier. No one's going to attack from the east. So imagine, I don't know what it's like, but on the walls of Jericho, which at the time were the widest in the known world, it was the most strategically fortified city with walls that were so high and so thick, they were almost impenetrable. They didn't really have to worry about anything. But imagine a guard just kind of leaning on his spear, sort of gives a casual glance out at the east side towards the Jordan. Maybe it's foggy, I don't know, just for a little drama. And suddenly the fog dissipates, and there's up to 2 million men, women, and children now at your doorstep. And God had commanded them to silently wait and see what he would do. What would 2 million people look like? This is the crowd assembled at President Obama's inauguration that they say was up to 1.8 million people. Imagine having that many people at your doorstep and pretty much saying, we're coming in. That would be daunting. And it's interesting, if you were to go back a few chapters, Rahab, if you're familiar with the story, before Joshua crossed the Jordan, they sent spies in, and the spies were engaging with a woman named Rahab, and she said this of how the people in her city thought of the Israelites. And this was from 4 years earlier. She says, when we heard of it, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on earth below. Friends, the people in Jericho, when they see this mass of people, their hearts had to melt a second time, because God's glory was being unveiled before their eyes. God's glory is an amazing thing. John Piper has an awesome quote. He says, the glory of God is the manifest beauty of his holiness. But listen to this. He says, it is the going public of his holiness. Scripture describes God as being perfectly holy, other than. The angels, all they could cry in his presence is, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. Holy, holy. They have it on repeat. But when God's holiness goes public, that's when we behold his glory. And I don't know if you've seen that before. I'm wondering just one last time this morning, looking at 2019. Again, when God moved in behalf of the nation of Israel, it was over the top. It was extravagant. It was beyond Joshua's expectations. It was God showing off. And I'm wondering if in 2019, looking back, maybe there's a trial, maybe there's a circumstance, maybe there's something that you were navigating through as an individual or as a family, and looking back, you're like, I can't believe we've made it. God was so profoundly involved, and this is just overtly just God. That's the only explanation. I was wondering if anyone would be willing to share maybe just a situation briefly that can kind of describe a moment where, going into 2019, it looked hopeless, or we were so discouraged and demoralized, and yet here we are at the end of 2019, whole and sound and love provided for. Would anyone, I don't know if anyone's got maybe a story they'd like to share looking back on God's provision? Again, we have 3 microphones. Yeah.
So I think a lot of you have heard our story already, but my wife and I had our plans laid out. I was planning on retiring, and we got an assignment drop. My career field, we go basically 2 places, and so I had those 2 places on my dream sheet, and an assignment popped up for the only place not on there, and it was absolute worst case scenario for us. And we, as a family, we started praying a lot more about the person who had assigned us to this. We were like, why would they do this? And we started praying a lot more for that individual. And so we had the assignment sitting out there waiting for us. My orders dropped 2 weeks before we were supposed to actually be out of the country. I didn't have enough time to out-process. And 2 days before the end of the month, when I had to, no kidding, be out of the country, they canceled the assignment and they approved me to retire. So it was just an amazing work of God.
Yeah, especially sometimes the Department of Defense can seem like, well, this is beyond God's control. It's bigger than that in bureaucracy. But man, you can lots of times absolutely see God's fingerprints when things get canceled when they shouldn't be canceled, and when things get approved, which technically should never have been approved. But looking back at this story, I was getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. Joshua and the Israelites still needed to cross the Jordan. The river's overflowing. Joshua has 2 million people to get across the river. He has no boats. He has no pontoon bridges, no amphibious vehicles. Joshua's kind of at a loss. There's absolutely nothing that I can do to accomplish your task, God. What are we going to do? The Levites that are carrying the ark step in the Jordan. God upstream holds back the water. Similar to when the Israelites crossed on the Red Sea. What was once a raging river is now a dry riverbed. So 2 million people, I don't know how long that takes. They waddle across this river. Every second that ticks by makes the miracle more miraculous. And it takes, I don't know if it takes an hour, 2 hours, a day for everyone to get across. But as the Levites with the ark are standing in the middle of what was once a raging river, but now a dry riverbed, they are holding, I don't know if they're muscle fatigue or they had to swap out, because I'm assuming it was heavy. But they're standing there, and as the last person, goat, donkey, everything gets across, Joshua commands leaders from all 12 tribes of Israel, and he says, come back and look towards the center of the riverbank. Go back in and bring out the largest rock that you can find. Carry it, lug it, roll it, bring it to the shore's edge. And then in Gilgal, which is nearby, they took those 12 stones and they erected a pile, a memorial. Once they took those stones out, then the Ark of the Covenant was carried out. The minute the priests that were carrying it, they got to the other side, the river came rushing back. They erected the memorial, and we read in Joshua 4, there's a long way introduction to get where we are, but we're at the key passage for this morning. Trust me, we're on time here. But in Joshua 4, 20 through 24, it says this, and those 12 stones which they took out of the Jordan, Joshua set up at Gilgal. And he said to the people of Israel, when your children ask their fathers in times to come, what do these stones mean? Then you shall let your children know. Imagine a parent dropping down to a knee, bringing them close and pointing towards the direction of the Jordan. In verse 22, then you shall let your children know Israel passed over this Jordan on dry ground. From the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan for you until you passed over, as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up for us until we passed over. And the question is why? Why would we set this up? So that, and why would we set it up to remember this event? Verse 24, so that all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, that you may fear the Lord your God forever. Looking at that last part, I see that there's two reasons why God commanded the Israelites to set this memorial up. The first is, we read there in 24, that the earth will know that the hand of the Lord is mighty. Friends, within the church and within the marketplace, when we remember, when we brag about what God has done, the church and the world are reminded that there's a loving, powerful, sovereign God at work among them. When they see him at work in your life, they see your faith and trust in him and how he moves. People may hate God, but they can't shake the reality that he's alive and well and active in your life. But here's the caveat. They have to know the stories. They have to know about it. Sometimes you're silent witness, they can see it, they see your demeanor, they see the outcome. But friends, the more we vocalize and verbalize what God is up to, what he has done that can't be explained, it can't be explained away, people are left walking away scratching their head and saying, I still don't know what to do about it, but that actually happened. They're actually responding that way, and they're not putting an asterisk by it, but they're pointing towards somebody as the person who made this possible. So that's the first thing that happens when we set up a memorial, a way to remember, and our kids ask about, what was that for? Tell me the story again. We're reminded, the people are reminded that there is an active God moving among us. But then the second half of that, and the first part is, so that all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty. But then it says that you may fear the Lord your God forever. Friends, a second reason, when we remember God's immensity, when we remember his involvement in our lives, it should cause us to fear the Lord. Let's talk about that fear for a moment. It's a word that we can get kind of confused. And Martin Luther, German theologian from a few centuries ago, he brought some insight as to kind of help us give us some handles on this word fear. And he distinguished fear into two types of categories. He distinguished them what he called the servile fear and the filial fear. Servile fear is the fear, let's say, of a jailer that has a whip in his hand, or a torturer, a servant that has to work for a malicious owner. That type of fear is usually where we go to. Is it's like, oh, I'd be fearful as well. But filial fear is the fear that a child has for a father. Tremendous love, respect, and admiration towards a mom or a dad. Not wanting to displease the one that provides comfort and security. Friends, that's the type of fear that is being talked about, where we have a sense of awe and respect for the majesty of God. I highlighted this verse last week, but again, the author of Hebrews 10, verse 31, he reminds us it's a frightening thing to fall in the hands of a living God. Depending on how you relate to that God, the fact that he is living and active and much bigger than we are should cause us to have a sense of respect and awe if we know him. It's kind of like the lump of clay on a potter's wheel. Pretty much can't say much at all. Has to you're absolutely, obviously in control. I can't really do anything here. I understand that just a mere movement of your finger could totally destroy my shape, everything about me. Even Jesus, talking about this proper mindset, to remind us, like in Matthew 28, Jesus says, do not fear those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Rather, fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell. It's just a subtle reminder, do not forget who you are dealing with. Though the Bible and Christianity points towards a thrust towards intimacy with God. There's a reality that Jesus himself, he says, I call you friends. Paul says we're co-heirs with him. We're co-heirs with Christ. We at the same time need to remember our right place. I remember when I used to work with a man up in Minnesota. He was a well-known youth speaker, and he was my boss. I did an internship with him, eventually worked with him, but I only knew him as Mark. And I mean, he taught me a lot, and obviously I respected him, but hey, it's just Mark. He drove that kind of ugly green color pickup truck. It was I knew Mark, but we went to this conference out in, I don't know where it was. It was the East Coast somewhere. And I'm just sitting with Mark because we're, kind of friends, and still he's my boss, but we're friends. But everyone that talked about him would always defer to him. Even in the conferences, people paid a lot of money to be at this conference, and the speaker at the conference would be talking, and then would look to Mark and say, Mark, do you have anything you want to add? And I'm thinking, hey, this is just Mark. See, I had become a little bit too casual with him in the sense that I had forgotten that this man has accomplished so much for the kingdom. And it's not just Mark. Again, we don't have to put people on pedestals, but I was just reminded of this reality that there's a phrase that to an extreme, familiarity breeds contempt. And we're not being contemptuous with the Lord, but sometimes we can become so lackadaisical that we're just high-fiving the Lord. And yet, when we remind ourselves and remind people of God at work in our lives, there should be a healthy fear and reverence that comes with it. When we are thinking about 2019, that story in Joshua just really reminds us just the importance of reminding ourselves, whether it be through a pile of rocks or some way, shape, or form, how are we going to remember this moment and not forget? Because friends, I don't know about you, but my memory is real shaky. There are some years where, man, God in so very profound ways moves And yet the next year I can totally forget about that to the point that I'm fearful and trepidatious about situations that I'm navigating through as if the previous year didn't happen. But if we look back at 2019, what does remembering look like for us today? Maybe it looks like before the year's out, you get a journal, something to write on, and sitting down and walking through and making a list of all the ways that God has been faithful to you this past year. Better yet, doing that with your family. Maybe if you're artistic, coming up with a way to commemorate an incident. Maybe it means standing up a rock straight up in your backyard that reminds you every time you look at it, like, why is that rock pointing straight up? Oh, that reminds me of this situation, so I'll never forget. I talk about this a lot. Those of us that are parents, we have this burden on us, this desire for our children, the well-being of our children. Most of the time, that is absolutely God's control, but we also absolutely wield significant influence in the life of our children. But many times I think, and even just going to the worst case scenario, if in our family, God's provision, God's moving in our midst, if it's celebrated, if it's talked about at length, even in my own family, my children can just wander from the Lord, and even if they're in a prison cell someday, to look back and say, I may have decided this, and this about the Lord, but I can't shake the fact that I've seen it. I've seen Him move, I've seen what He's about, and I can't get away from it. Friends, those are powerful, powerful tools that God can use. But if we don't remember, if we don't celebrate, if we don't talk about it, if we don't point our children to, look what God did, isn't our God good? Then as they branch out on their own, friends, their foundation may be very, very fragile. Maybe looking into 2020, how to be a better steward of 2020, circling back with your family and coming up with something that can help you remember God's provision. That maybe people are into Pinterest, you get some cool looking jar, that you put notations of what God has done. Obviously, the more things that are in it as the year progresses, we're reminded of, man, God is faithful. Maybe it looks like at New Year's or at Christmas, reading those or reminding ourselves, I forgot about that. That was such a big deal. I lost so much sleep over that, and yet here I am 9 months later, and I haven't even thought about it because God took care of it. But friends, if we forget, then that's not helpful. Maybe looking at 2020 and your correspondence in this next year, when you correspond to people, really making it a goal to brag about God's faithfulness in all your correspondence. His faithfulness, His provision as much as you can. Making a mental note to try and tell as many people as possible, this is the type of God that I serve. And friends, this is a good habit because all of us looking at 2020, we need to start recognizing how good and capable God is and not forgetting, because we don't know what 2020 has in store for us. It's good for us, but it's also right and appropriate for all that God has done for us. I don't know if you've ever maybe done something for a spouse or for your boss. You worked really hard to do something and it doesn't get acknowledged. That can kind of sting, but imagine the thousands or millions of thanks that God deserves from each of us that He doesn't get each year, because we just keep going, and we forget to pause and circle back and remember. Your financial provision, clean bills of health, experiences, friends, family, security, grace, mercy, forgiveness, all in 2019. That God is worthy of our thanks and gratitude. But those are the things that he did. What does that say about the type of person that does those things? What has God been for you this past year in 2019? And he's been a promise keeper to me. He's been my sustainer, my provider, my encourager. He's the author of my life. He's been so faithful to me. He's been my defender. Looking at 2020, we will need to know God in those ways. God, if you were like this for me in 2019, I now can trust you confidently with my 2020. Friends, my challenge to all of us and myself, and this whole message I'm speaking to myself as well, is that we just keep this at the forefront of our minds this year as we approach 2020. Having that mentality that because of God's faithfulness in my past, I really have nothing to be anxious about this next year. As we kind of end this morning, if you just want to close your eyes just to kind of get by yourself. I don't know what 2019 was like for you. And I don't want to water down or make insignificant, very significant situations that you've had to deal with. But friends, the very fact that you are here this morning is a testament to God's faithfulness. But my prayer would be that if you came in here still grappling and tied to and bound to anxiety and concerns about situations in 2019, that as God gently grabs your hand, you would take your focus away from the problem or the event, and you would look to Him as He leads you into 2020. I'm reminded of the 10 lepers that Jesus healed. Years of struggle, years of being marginalized, being ostracized, years of not being held. And in one moment, Jesus heals them, and all 10 skip out of that area, rejoicing, celebrating this new lease on life, and yet one has the wisdom to come back and say thank you. And Jesus says, were there not 9 others? And yet only one turned back. Jesus, in this room, in my life, and in our lives, Lord, may we be known as men and women that err on coming back to you and saying thank you before we run off in joy to brag about the provision. Lord, may we brag about the provider. God, be glorified in our lives, Lord. Make us good stewards of just having great hearts of gratitude. Lord, we do want to say thank you for your provision, your goodness to us. But Lord, give us eyes to see what you're up to, that we can be even better stewards going into 2020. We love you, Jesus. We just say thank you for being such a good God. In your name we pray. Amen.